Hello and welcome to our session titled The New Development Bank, a Stronger Role for the BRICS in the Global Financial Architecture. The BRICS economies have jointly established a $100 billion development bank to be based in Shanghai. What does this new institution mean for global economic management? And what are some of the key areas of focus over the medium term? On our panel, we had some very distinguished guests. Sergei Storchak, Finance Deputy Minister of Russia, Philippe Louis-Roux, Vice President of Policy and Partnerships at the EBRD, Amar Bhattacharya, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, Kundapur Vaman Kamat, the first nominated President of the New Development Bank, Pedro Alba, Vice President for Budget from the World Bank Group, Xiaolin Yang, Director General of the Department of International Economic and Financial Cooperation at the Ministry of Finance of China, and Vladimir Dmitriev, Chairman of the Bank for Development and Foreign Economic Affairs of Russia. Kundapur, if I go to you first, why? Why do you need this bank? What do you want to accomplish?
Well, I think the challenges that we see in terms of work that needs to be done in the developing countries is so great. I think we need, I think the BRICS countries felt that you needed a new development partner, so that's what we are. We are just a new development partner.
Oh, that's very modest of you, okay? If I can go to our Chinese colleague here. Why? I think it's patently obvious for a lot of people that if we look at most of the major financial institutions of the world today, they're geopolitical. It's after the Second World War. I'm thinking of Bretton Woods, IMF, EBRD, World Bank, and now we have from the Global South some very significant money and banks. How are you guys going to be different?
It's trying to complement the existing...
Complement?
Yes, complement the existing international financial architecture, which was built after the Second World War. And the existing structure in those institutions is controlled predominantly by the developed countries. But this one is a new experiment, 5 countries on equal footing, sharing a similar voice. And we will try our best to improve the operating structure and make it more efficient. Secondly, about the ways we are going to do our business is to try to learn from the existing institutions, try to implement or replicate the good practices that they have so far. And thirdly, we will try to be more effective of mobilizing financial resources. We will try to develop a better mode which will cater to the needs of our client countries and try to indigenize the programs which will fit their needs.
I think we should recognize that the scale and complexity of the challenge we face on infrastructure now is unprecedented. It took the developed world 100 years to establish a modern infrastructure. China showed that it can be done in 30 years. Now we have the rest of the 5 billion people in the world aspiring to do that in the coming 20 years. But the way in which they do it will matter just not for them, but for the planet. And what we have is a new prospect of a new institution that can be a precursor, not just of scale, but of change.
Sergei, if I can go to you here. I mean, if you were on the board of this new BRICS bank, what kind of rate of return do you want, or is that important to you? People or profits?
You see, in comparison to any commercial institutions where the profit is an aim of its functioning, here we never thought about the work of these institutions in this dimension. So probably it's first people, but based on bankable projects.
What about other countries? Will the BRICS bank here, could, Portugal or Spain or the United States one day go to this bank?
I'm actually Spanish, so look, I think I wanted to answer a little bit of a different question because we have a huge challenge in the world, and we have about 1 billion people who are still in poverty today, right? And it's a huge challenge. We've committed ourselves, the World Bank, to eradicate poverty by 2030, and we can't do it alone. So we actually welcome right? These new institutions that are coming forth. I think what our Chinese colleague was totally right. We should work on the old enemy we've always had all together, which is poverty. Right, not trying to create new rivalries.
Is that a profit-making enterprise? Because if it would have been, if it was a profit-working enterprise, it would have already been done.
But we're not. We're not a profit-making enterprise. We're a World Bank. It's actually it's the ownership is actually sitting around this table. The Russians, the Chinese, and others, like you were saying. About 48% of our shareholders are held by developing countries, right? So, in that sense, we don't make profits.
Okay, if I can go to you.
There are actually several priorities of the new development bank, which are in line with the policies of national development banks, like our bank, like China Development Bank and others. Infrastructure, small and medium enterprises, removal of infrastructure restrictions of economic growth. These are main goals and main priorities of the activity of such institutions and the new development bank in particular. Of course, we will prioritize these directions of its activity.
I want to go to the front row here. Jim, go ahead.
Hello. Ni hao. I'm an investor, international investor. I was disturbed to hear that you say you were going to learn from the existing institutions, because the existing institutions have been abysmal failures over the past 70 years. If you go back and look at the World Bank and the IMF, they have never, or very rarely, been right about anything other than spending billions and billions and billions of dollars and coming up with great lifestyles for the bureaucrats who have the jobs. But, and you should see.
That's why we have Jim here.
You should see how they live, and you should see their benefits that they get for doing very little. They don't make a profit because they're hopeless. And the projects that they do are never, ever efficient or profitable themselves. But having said that, the 5 nations that are setting up this new bank, which the world desperately needs, because the others are corroded and maybe even, well, at least corroded and stodgy, to say the least. But the 5 nations we're talking about, I don't see that any of them have ever been, except China, have ever been terribly successful in anything. You look at the Soviet Union or Russia for the past 70 years, you look at South Africa, you look at Brazil, India, none of them have come up with anything terribly successful. So why do you think these guys are going to be any better than the World Bank and the IMF, which are disasters?
Gentlemen, anyone? Panel want to field that?
No, I think I need to answer this question, but I will answer it after I address what Sergey said. The earlier question was, are you meant for profit? And Sergey answered it in a way, I think, appropriately to say we will look for bankable projects. Certainly the projects are to be bankable, so let's not, and in the context that you will have shareholders' money and you will have borrowed money. So unless you are able to recover that money, you are going to go fat, as it were, in very short time. So that is not on. So projects will have to be bankable, and you will need to recover your investment in time. I think what Xiang Shaolin meant in terms of learning, there is indeed a learning process. Even if somebody has made a mistake, you need to learn from it. I think that's what he meant. And clearly, I can say that none of us are in office as of today, but we have been doing our work. What we have put on is understand everything that all the multilateral banks have been doing, try to see what is it that we need to do now, given the challenges that this might have posed in the past, and then try to put our own agenda. So clearly, I think that is something that we will do. Your point is well taken. We need not repeat the mistakes that could have been done in the past, and we will set our own agenda. But to answer this question clearly and unequivocally, we will look for bankable projects that basically allow us to service our obligations. And that, I think, becomes the ground rule.
Very forceful. Anybody else want to follow up on that?
Just
Please
on
do.
that, yes. Frankly, I'm not sure how much you visited bank projects, World Bank projects. But
Many
I've been
times,
in the
sir,
field.
many times. I've driven around the world
I've been
twice,
in the field
and
for
I've seen
8
you guys
years,
throwing money
here.
out the window all
Let
over
me
the
give you an
world.
example of what we did in collaboration, actually with Beb and others here sitting around us. So there's a project, right, where the Chinese authorities built a road up to the Kazakh border. Then we funded with actually EBRD, the Asian Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank. We helped the Kazakhs build their section of the road, right? And then the Russian authorities, of course, did their section. And now we have a road that goes from Shanghai to St. Petersburg, right? We've diminished the kilometers by almost 3,000, about a third. And I think actually that's a very successful project, because you mentioned the Silk Road, right? That's an example of what we can achieve together in terms of collaboration. I've been to many projects in the bank, from education projects in Argentina to disarmament projects in the Congo, right? And I've seen what we've done, and I totally disagree with you there.
Vladimir, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think striking example of how collaboration between private business, private investors, institutional investors, and international financial institutions is. I think the majority of those who are here on the forum have come through pool cover. What is pool cover? We have institutional investors there, and we have financing vehicles as our bank, EBRD, the Black Sea Trade and IFC. Here we are, international and national institutions for development. And I hope and I believe that the new Bank for Development will be that sort of institution which will assist jointly with other financial institutions, local and regional, to finance that infrastructure projects.
Philip, do you want to jump in?
Just a very quick one. In fact, I'm going full circle to Dimitri. I think that the Pulkovo airport is a very good example. And again, this is not only the finance that was brought by EBRD, but and IFC and others. There was a lot of knowledge that came with it, because it was one of the first big public-private partnerships. So the government of St. Petersburg, the federal government, we are the lawyers, bankers. There was it's the knowledge part we all forget, because it's true. The big numbers are there. You can put $1, £1, or €, sign or whatever in front. It's big. But the knowledge part is always, I found in this debate, is kind of the forgotten. But sometimes it's like the intangible.
Yaroslav, go ahead.
Well, I think the future, the really important area to explore for the new bank is human capital. And we're talking a lot about infrastructure, but if we go too far in this direction and we disregard this tremendous potential, probably the biggest potential that emerging markets have, I think this is going to be very costly in the longer term. So I think early on it's going to be very important to address the development of healthcare, education, and the most significant, again, resource that emerging markets have in terms of their longer-term development. And in that regard, I think the World Bank has done quite a lot, and using some of the practices and some of the achievements that the World Bank had, including with regard to conditionality, which I think should be taken into account by the new institution, I think the new institution can build on that experience.
Especially countries that have been in a rather poor state, people tend to attribute those mistakes not only to ignorance or being out of touch with the reality on the ground, but also to vested interests and the poor quality of advice.
The North Atlantic countries are in control. And often these countries have a short-sighted view of how these institutions should act, in my opinion. So you can find powerful countries, powerful stakeholders of the IMF or the World Bank subordinating the institutions to their short-term or medium-term political agenda.
We want basic income. Well, there was something called basic income. 20 years ago, it was called the yield curve and pension accounts, where people would participate in a global economy based on supply and demand of money as determined by an interest rate. But once the interest rate was forced down by central bankers to make people like Jamie Dimon $1 billion by ripping people off 24/7, then we're now in a period where we have to think about basic income and recreate everything from scratch, even though we had a system called basic income called the global economy, which is now finished.
Welcome back to the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. We're discussing the BRICS' new development bank. Ben, when you look at these new institutions, do they run parallel to Western institutions in your mind? Are they going to be competitors? Because, again, if we think in terms of conditionality and the geopolitical angle here, will be a better bet to go to one of these emerging banks because they're more interested in getting their money back, a profit, and not so worried about the geopolitics of El Salvador or Honduras or Ukraine.
I think one of the panelists already brought it up. The needs are so enormous. None of the development banks, or even collectively, have the resources available to do all the investment that's needed. So in that sense, there's no competition. And at the end of the day, people who need money will take it from wherever they can get it. And so you can knock on all the doors, and if you're offered, you will. My concern with this is that the new bank, the new development bank, for me, it looks too small. $100 billion, all said and done, is not a lot of money. Just Russia's infrastructure needs is over $1 trillion. And you're talking about, more than half the world's population in terms of the countries that are participating. And I come back to my other point. The reason why I brought up health, and I agree entirely with Yaroslav, and infrastructure. I worked on a report for the World Health Organization in my former capacity as journalist for The Lancet. And the World Health Organization was saying the single most profitable investment a government can make is into the health of its people, because that increased productivity, people don't get sick, they go to work every day, they work 10 years longer, and then they don't cost as much to look after at the end of their lives. It's an enormous change, and that no government, emphasizes this, because the returns on a health investment come 50, 60 years down the road. If you want my advice, which of course, maybe, the development bank should, if it was me, focus on those two things only, because you have limited resources and they produce massive transformative effects. And given the limited amount of money, and it's what the emerging markets need more than anything else. Everything else.
Is that sexy enough for you guys? Go ahead. Yeah. So, in the discussions that are happening this year on the Sustainable Development Goals, there is emphasis on four things: on education, health, sustainable infrastructure, what this panel has been mentioning, and sustainable agriculture, because agriculture is also key to the upliftment of well-being. Now, the institutions that we are talking about, many of them have different comparative advantages, so everybody doesn't have to do the same thing. This new institution is primarily focused on infrastructure, partly because the existing institutions withdrew from infrastructure over 2 decades, leaving a huge void. So in a way, this institution is coming and filling a gap. Today, if you look at the entire multilateral development bank system, the gross financing of infrastructure projects, $30 billion. Peanuts. So 50 billion, 100 billion makes a difference. But I can assure you that if we want to meet the scale of the challenge, much more will be needed.
Sheldon, do you want to jump in there? Go ahead.
I will agree. Education and health are important areas the bank should tackle. But that should not be the only area the bank should tackle. Let me give you an example. Once I talked to my colleague in the China Exim Bank. They have a project in one of the African countries, which is a health project. They help to build the hospitals in the remote area of that country. When they built everything, and then what they found is they don't have water, they don't have roads, they don't have electricity. How can those hospitals helping those poor peoples? So for China, for the past more than 30 years of experience, as the Chinese saying says, if you want to get rich, build a road first. So that's why this bank, the pillar of this bank will be emphasizing on the infrastructure.
Jim, but almost all of these major areas, sanitation, education, healthcare, et cetera, these are governments, regional governments, local governments, government.
The best news I've heard today is that there perhaps is going to be a private partnership with the new bank. It's going to be private-public. Because I certainly have more confidence in Deutsche Bank than I do in World Bank, for instance, if you want to make some comparisons, because Deutsche Bank has to survive. World Bank just gets more money.
But Jim, isn't that just replicating the same things that you're talking about, that you're so critical of? Because you're just saying, take the same model, it just comes from the global south and they have some extra cash.
I said the best thing I've heard today. I didn't say I'd heard anything good. The least bad thing I've heard today is that maybe there's going to be a public-private partnership, there will be accountability, and the projects will have to work. And I hope that something like that happens. But yes, everything we're talking about, who's against clean water?
Yeah.
Who's against new infrastructure, new roads? You're right, you've got to have the roads to make the money, to open up the economy and open up everything else. Let's hope it works. I'm just afraid it's going to become another bureaucracy. I mean, where are you going to get your people, for instance? You're going to get them out of, you're going to hire people from the World Bank? Oh my God.
All right, gentlemen, anyone want to, that's a hot potato, go ahead. Go ahead.
EBRD just hired me from the World Bank. So.
See what I mean?
I know exactly. No, I share the pain. No, but seriously, we're talking about lessons learned. And I think that, like everything, you learn from the mistakes, it was said before, and you learn from the successes, and there have been both. One thing that Pedro was saying is absolutely correct, and that's one lesson that we've learned in many years at the World Bank, which is the country focus. It's not one size fits all, and it's not, you can do, I know it sounds very pedestrian, but it took some time to the sequencing, and you have to do it in a political economy, at a different level of institutions, so you have to adjust. And one country may be, a particular subsector in health, another will be clean water, roads, railway. I mean, so you cannot have purely a sectoral drive. You have to see how it fits the country. Another lessons that emerge from this discussion is what you said, sir, is the public-private partnership. I think, and that links to what Tamar was saying. Even if we have a multiplier effect on the public sector that will not be good enough in terms of pure volume. Now we're going from quality also to the volume size. So it seems to me, if we want to make a real dent, all of us, old, new, relatively less old, we need to leverage the pool of resources that is out there. And I think that point was also made. So these are a few lessons that I remember just from this discussion. And I think this is pretty good. This is exactly the intent of this panel.
Gentlemen, anyone want to comment on it? And then I'd like to open it up to our audience here.
Yeah, I think in a positive way, these new institutions can become very important platforms for South-South cooperation. And let me give an example. Today, the most successful cases of infrastructure development are not in Europe, not in America, they are in China, they are in Korea, they are in Turkey. If you can create platforms that bring the best in terms of what can be done, you can improve accountability, governance, transparency, all of these things while benefiting from the success of the South itself.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Sarwan Hatipola, I'm the CEO of Business Environment Risk Intelligence in Washington, D.C. It's a country rating agency. My question about the bank is about its timing. Because there's a lot of concern in the United States as well as the West, but I'll put the European Union aside, they have their own problems right now. But the United States is worried that the macroeconomic environment in the BRIC countries is very fragile. The private industry, one of the panelists said, I couldn't see because of the camera, private sector is of utmost importance in terms of the development of this bank. Now, I think everybody in this room, 90% would agree that the interest rates in the United States will be raised before the end of this year. That could lead to capital outflows from majority of BRIC countries. My question is, do you think timing of this bank, with all the objectives, all the good objectives that we talk, which are all true, do you think the timing is correct, or should some structural issues with the BRIC countries need to be addressed first so that the BRIC countries are on stronger footing before the idea of this bank introduced? Very quick second question. There's also a rumor going on that Greece is about to apply to be a member of the bank. Is that correct, or Any comments would be
Okay, well,
appreciated.
let's take one at a time here. First of all, it's concerns coming out of the United States, a country that is the most indebted country in the world and has no way to pay for it. So I find it really quite remarkable that there are politicians in the United States telling everyone else how to run their economies. Number two, Greece. Well, I was going to kind of let that hover around. Gentlemen, do you want to answer that?
From the beginning, the founding members agreed between themselves that these institutions would be open to other United Nations members. So after we set up the institution, after it starts running normally, I think any of UN members can apply for membership.
Okay, I want to ask President-designate of the bank here a hypothetical question. It's 25 years from now, and we're all alive, on this panel at least. What accomplishments do you want to tell the audience 25 years from now, of the bank that you have a vision of today?
I'll put it very simply that we have looked at the needs of the South and have lent a hand to countries in the South to develop and grow and meet their aspirations, or at least go well on the path to meeting their aspirations. To me, that's a very simple statement, and if we all work towards that, we would have made progress. I don't want to put it in dollars and cents, or renminbi or rupiah or rubles, or
a
peso
banker
or
that speaks like
South
a
African
diplomat.
rand.
Wonderful,
But
wonderful.
I'll put it in simply as a statement of aspiration.
All right, I want to thank a wonderful panel here talking about a really wonderful idea if it works out. And I want to thank the front row for being our reality check here. I want to thank everyone else for joining us here. Watch RT.